Welcome to Fast Talk, the Velo News podcast and everything you need to know to ride like a pro.
Hello and welcome to Fast Talk. I'm your host, Chris Case, sitting down on a snowy day here in Boulder, Colorado with that lover of organization, Coach Trevor Connor. Take a guess at how many Trello accounts that guy has. My God, it's a lot. Which brings me to the theme of the day. Season planning. We all understand that to race or ride at our best, we need to periodize our season, and that has to do with planning. It's obvious and essential for a pro who's racing upwards of 80 races in a season to plan ahead to periodize. Simply put, they wouldn't survive if they went hard all the time. They need a base, they need rest, and they need peaks. But what about those of us who only have 3 or 4 races in a single season? Or to take it one step further, what about those of us who don't race at all, or just have a single Gran Fondo at some point? How do we map out our seasons and prepare for those few events? Do we still need to periodize? Can we be on form all year round? Today, we'll dive into those questions and talk about, first, what we can learn from the pros. Even though they do a lot more races, the same physiological principles apply when you're talking about reaching your best form. And the pros have learned a lot about how to do that right. Next, we'll talk about what you can't take from pros. The simple fact that they do so many races means they can race themselves into shape. That's a lot harder to do when you have a month between each of your events. So we'll talk about what not to mimic. Next, we'll dive into a few scenarios, including one in which you have 4 or 5 races in your season and they're all within a short time frame. A second scenario in which you have 4 or 5 events, but they're spread out with long periods of time between each. Another scenario of doing a single big event. And finally, the scenario in which you don't participate in any official events, but love to hit the local weekly group ride. Today, we're using a roundtable format with 3 top-level coaches to answer these questions. Our first guest is the now famous, much-loved Colby Pearce. Also joining us is the always infamous, sometimes loved, Grant Holicky with Forever Endurance. I kid, of course. Grant is just as special, if not more so. And who's that third top-level coach? Well, we're giving Trevor the benefit of the doubt. We're giving that top-level status to him, too. He's here, as always. As we've already mentioned on the show, there are some exciting things happening at Fast Labs. We're growing quickly, and we're particularly excited to have Colby and Grant on the show today because we're hoping to get them to be a more regular part of what we offer. Part of this Fast Labs family, if you will. Keep an eye on our website, that's fastlabs.com, and watch for future Fast Labs podcast channels on your favorite podcast app. And as always, reach out to us at fasttalk@fastlabs.com. Now, let's make you fast.
So, Chris, we've been kind of excited to bring Aftershock headphones onto the show as one of our sponsors. As you know, I've been using them for years. And I admit, when I first got mine, I thought they were just kind of gimmicky. They claim to be bone conduction. So they sit on your cheekbones and they send vibrations through your cheekbones that go directly to your eardrum. That allows you to keep your ears open and you can hear your surroundings. And I remember just thinking, no, they just got speakers on them that just sit really close to your ears, and it's completely a gimmick. But I remember right after I got them, I actually put them on. I put my fingers in my ears to block my ear canals, and they actually got louder. So this actually truly is, it is bone conduction.
That's
it goes
crazy.
Through your cheekbones. And the advantage of this is if you're out for a ride and you want to listen to some music or listen to any particular podcast, you can have these on, hear your music, but your ears are completely open so you can hear cars and everything else that's going on around
exactly.
you.
A lot safer that way.
Of course, when I'm riding with Chris, I prefer to have the completely noise-canceling headphones in so I just don't have to hear them.
That's not nice at all, Trevor.
Sorry, Chris.
This episode was sponsored by Aftershocks, the award-winning headphone brand best known for its open-ear listening experience. Powered by patented best-in-class bone conduction technology, Aftershocks headphones sit outside your ear so you can hear your music and your surroundings. Aftershocks is a must-have headphone for cyclists, providing the ultimate level of safety and comfort without compromising sound quality. To learn more and save $50 on Aftershocks, bundles, visit aftershokz.com. That's AFTERSHOKZ.com and use code FASTTALK. We are live in the studio.
5-minute timer just stopped.
You're done. We're out.
We're done. Cut.
Thanks for listening. Great show, everybody.
All right. Well, it is a pleasure to have our two of our favorite guests in the house today. We're going to do a little round table. We've got, I don't know how many years of coaching experience in the room, but like 100 probably. Probably close to 100 years of experience, honestly. So it's a pleasure to have Colby Pearce, Grant Holicky,
sir. Thank you.
And as always, Coach Trevor Connor here with us in the studio.
How many years do you
0.
contribute? Oh, okay. I just wanted to make sure.
Well, I've coached Trevor in life skills.
Perfect.
Does that count?
Are you a life coach?
Sometimes.
Yeah, well,
I play one on a podcast.
I'm here for you. Yeah, I know that feeling.
You have done a horrible job.
Hey, I'm trying. It's all about the effort.
Hired Chris as a coach?
Process-oriented coaching. The results aren't working out.
We'll get back to that in another podcast. Well, today we want to talk about season planning, but we want to have it be a bit more approachable, a bit more practical for people out there that, first of all, aren't pros. Because I don't know how many pros are listening to our show. If they are, that's great. This show might not pertain to them so much, but we've, from our survey, gotten some results back saying, we love hearing from pros, but we want something that speaks to us a bit more. And a lot of people, amateur riders, they're racing, maybe they're doing one big event a year, maybe they're doing a handful of events a year, and they're spread out months in between. They're not doing 20 race days a year, they're not doing 50 race days a year for certain. So this episode is all about how to plan that season when you're doing limited racing.
Colby, I actually got to ask you, what's the biggest season you've ever done? The most number of races?
I am sure I've had seasons that have had more than 80 starts, somewhere in there, maybe 90 with all the really dinky, every dinky Tuesday night track race or whatever. Yeah. But that was back in the day.
That was back in the day.
Yeah.
My biggest was 120 something starts.
Wow.
Show off. Total show off. He only asked you the question so that he could throw that stat in there.
You're probably right.
Notice how he didn't ask me, because then it just would have seemed like he was lying. What's your biggest start total? 35. I've had 120. See, you got to have somebody like Colby who he thought was going to be high, and then he can just trump him.
Mm-hmm. Well, you're cross. It's not a real sport.
He's not just. Whoa.
Fair enough. Fair enough. I don't have an argument.
Get the wrestling ring going.
I don't have an argument for that, to be completely honest.
Well, let's jump right in then, shall we? First of all, what can we learn from looking at how a pro plans their season? Are there things that we can take away from those that race upwards of 80, 100 times a year?
Yeah, absolutely. One thing that I kind of try to really address with all my riders is that people, if you start training with intent, meaning you're building load, adding load consistently on the bike from December 1, which is depending on what climate you're in, some athletes will do that. January 1 is also common, and also depends on when your season, some of your season goals are. Even for someone who's building and racing consistently, maybe you start racing in February or March, again, depending on where you are in the world. By the time you get to about the summer solstice, so about the third week in June, man, almost everybody, assuming they've had a relatively linear run, things have gone well, they've been building, they didn't, get the flu for 2 weeks or break a collarbone or have any really big setbacks, assuming that build has been relatively linear overall, they almost always need a real break. That's the time when you start to be like doing a few rides where you're like, man, that stung, that climb, that was the first time I really felt internally overheated. You've already got several months of hard training and racing under your belt, but you can't quite see the light at the end of the tunnel, assuming you're racing through August or September. It's the season's, the end isn't around the corner, but you've already got a ton of work behind you. So psychologically, it becomes a very long sort of tunnel at that point. And then physically, it's just the body doesn't respond to, people look at a calendar like, oh, 52 weeks in a year. That means I can train hard for 40 of them and lift. That's not the way humans work. They just don't. Humans are seasonal. Without getting down a tangent, this is one of the problems I have with Zwift and Trainer Road. Love you guys, but can't do criteriums all year long. So anyway, humans are seasonal. We're all seasonal animals. We have to kind of hibernate like bears a little bit. And then in the summer, we come out and run around and play in the mountains. Like that.
Well, and I think it's really easy to get down this road of whether you're a World Tour or Masters rider, where do I put the brake? Go on vacation with your family and don't bring a bike.
What?
Yeah, I know. It's amazing, right? Like do a run.
That's possible.
Frolic in the surf. But those breaks are really important. I think one of the things that you'll hear Colby and I talk about a lot, and we've talked about on this podcast in the past, start with where you're going to put your brake. Mm-hmm. And then maybe build your season around that. Mm-hmm. And then if that needs to shift because you got sick or you broke a collarbone like I did or any of those things, then you shift it. But if you have a starting point and you know where your mid-season light at the end of the tunnel is, everything gets a lot simpler. Mm-hmm. And you can race full gas into that knowing I got 3 more weeks, 3 more races. I get to really shut down for a little bit of time.
I love the fact that I will often give athletes a break, or they'll go on vacation with their family and be terrified. They'll go, I'm going to be off my bike for 10 days. I'm going to lose all my fitness. And then they come back and they do an interval set and crush the numbers.
Yeah, and they're amazing, right?
You're like, what happened? I thought I'd lose some fitness. You go, well, you probably lost a little fitness, but you're rested.
Mm-hmm. Well, and if we look at the science, I mean, what they lose is they lose freshness, they lose a little sharpness. They're not really losing fitness. The blood numbers are pretty similar through 2 weeks of bed rest, practically. At threshold or lower, I mean, you're going to lose some peak, you're going to lose some of that top end, but you're not losing nearly what you think you're losing. Mm-hmm. You know, when I was a swimmer, the old swimming conversation when we were kids is 1 day off's a 2-day setback. And it really messed with our brains. I mean, you know, I have an athlete now that I still battle this with, and she's in this place where it's like, I took a day off, I'm 3 days behind. Yeah. And I'm like, no, you took a day off, you're probably ahead.
First of all, you just added a day of that formula. But secondly,
yeah, some coaches had some really funky formulas. I mean, and in this day and age, you know, and we're gonna talk about this a lot, I'm sure, over the course of this podcast. We're not talking about a pro rider. We're talking about somebody who has a family, somebody who has a job, somebody who has a life outside or off the bike. That life load is extreme. And as Colby talks about the seasonal change, you have a job seasonal change. You have a family seasonal change. You have these rhythms and flows, and you got to be able to buy into the rhythm and the flow and I kind of understand where you go. And where we take our vacations, so many of us do it the same weekend every year. Spring break, if you have kids, 4th of July, all those things. That's just such a simple way to start this whole system. And I think that ebb and flow and that rhythm is crucial.
So it sounds like we're saying the one thing that you can take from pros, or one of the things you can take from pros, is you still need to periodize your season. You can't go, I don't race that much, so I can just do high intensity, go really hard all the time. You still need the base, you still need that build, and you need a rest. Well,
and I think, you know, if you're not racing at all, maybe you're doing one Grand Fondo or something like that, or you're doing an early season crit and then you're not doing another race for 8 weeks. You know, how you build the base or when you hit the sharpness or all those things, that can be a little bit of a comfort thing. That can be a little bit of where you like it. And I have a lot of athletes that like to do the sharpness right away because it gives them something to think about instead of that monotonous base riding all the time in February when they're on a trainer. But what we really, and Colby alluded to this, 20 years ago, 30 years ago, it was all about race days. It was all about racing into shape. People didn't take breaks. People didn't do that stuff. But we know better now. And so if they know better, they're the ones that are really doing the science. We should take that from them.
There's a beautiful kind of weird tension in the world of cycling across all levels. And as an analogy, I'll say, I mean, think about the step forward we took when we removed shifters from our down tube and added them to where our brake levers are. Like everyone would agree, except the dinkiest old codger ever, that was a huge step forward. Not pointing at anyone in this room.
Not pointing at anybody.
I have a bike with down tube shifters.
Of course you do.
I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that, but it was a massive step forward in performance, safety, all kinds of things, right? So that's a big step forward. And there are a lot of carryovers from the sport of cycling that people haven't quite let go of. And a lot of those carryovers exist in the world of bike fitting. There are lots of Italian wives' tales, and most of them are garbage. A few of them are quite useful, but most of them are complete crap. And it's the same thing with training. There's some old, the can you race yourself into shape, which I know we can talk about that as well.
Yeah. Why don't we flip this around? We're talking predominantly about what you can observe that pros do about rest. What can we observe about pros when it comes to peaking that can be applied to the masters racer, the amateur racer out there?
Right.
So I would say one of the things that you can still apply when you look at a peaking schedule. So let's say even if you're just doing one Gran Fondo or one race, a lot of people focus on that. Well, I need that recovery. What I would recommend is you also need that phase beforehand where you actually beat yourself up a bit. A couple of weeks before the event, that week where you go, I'm going to train harder. I'm going to train longer. I'm going to hit the end of this week fatigued. So I always say, in order to peak, you have to have something to peak from.
Yes.
Otherwise, you're just not training.
Right.
Yeah.
So, and keeping in mind that training is stress the body, right? So it doesn't matter who your coach is or what the philosophy is. You may stress the body with volume. You may stress the body with intensity, depending on how much time you have available, all of those things. But yeah, you have to have a stressor period in order to taper off the stressor period. And otherwise, you just get stale.
And to actually take that one point further, whether you are a pro or just doing the Saturday morning group ride, if you want to get stronger, that fundamental principle applies to everybody. It's stress the body to a level that it's not used to, and then recover and let it adapt. And a lot of people who don't race, they still want to get stronger, and they get frustrated because they kind of do the same thing every
all the
week
time,
and
right.
really never stress themselves,
Stagnant.
and then just say, why aren't I getting better?
Yeah, we need to look at that in a micro scale and a macro scale, right? Macro being the whole season or a month or a training block. Look at it as a micro scale too. Maybe we want 2-day blocks or 3-day blocks and then recover off that 3-day block. But what we do see is so many athletes who don't do a lot of racing, they're going to do the same loop every day or the same loop every other day, and they just try to go faster on it. You know, I still think there's this prevalent idea of how many miles did you ride? And it's something that the pros have really moved away from. Yeah, they'll cover miles and they'll look at it later, but it's time. We're doing so much based on time. I was out for 3 hours. It doesn't really matter how far you went. And when you start looking at how far you went, that 3 hours starts to get a little bit faster. You get more aggressive. You get more aggressive because we're athletes or we're human nature. We want to do better than yesterday. And we've all been taught that by every Nike ad ever. Beat yesterday, right? So we're going to try to be better than yesterday.
What's Nike?
They're just screwing us up
Damn
all
it,
over the
we
place.
wanted them as a sponsor. Oh, and you ruined it.
Did we?
No, we're just going to be able. It's an opportunity to educate the audience. So, on that topic, if I can share a story I've been telling my athletes recently, and that's about quantifying load and how athletes think about load. Things have changed significantly in the last several years with the addition of power meters because that tracks up riders' output. So before power meters were around, riders used to go for a 3-hour ride, and they had maybe a heart rate strap. They had their cat-eye cyclometer so they could count time, or a wristwatch, and they had speed. But of course, weather plays such a massive role in their results on that ride that no two rides are comparable. You can't do a ride in June and then a ride in August and compare them back to back and say, oh, I was faster in August for sure, because of course, if the temperature change or pressure and humidity plays such a large role in that we have no idea whether you actually put out more power or not. Right?
Well, and I think it's great too on that same point. You get into this idea of, I love it when the tour puts up the metric of that was the fastest time trial ever, right? And it was like, well, it was downhill with the tailwind. Of course it was the fastest time trial ever. Let me show up at that course. I weigh 180. I'll rip it. Right. So, and I listen to this all the time with triathletes. I know that it's a cycling show, so we shouldn't bring that up. But they talk all the time about, I did my best mile swim time. I'm like, do you know how people measure a mile swimming course in a triathlon? They throw a buoy out there and go, that looks about right.
Right.
And so even if we have a laser sighter, this stuff's not relevant, right? So I think that's a huge point of time in the season, time of who you are, what you're wearing. There's so many metrics, and output variables. And response is unbelievably different.
Do you know I measured my swim time the last triathlon I did?
An hourglass?
Close. I actually discovered that walking along the bottom of the pool, I was faster.
Well, that's saying something.
Sprinting.
I'm not sure what that is.
With your feet on the bottom of the pool.
I think that's cheating.
Yeah, it might be, but
whatever.
Only if people can't tell.
So compare this to someone like a high jumper. Now, how does a high jumper train? Let's say that their best PR of all times that they did last year at the World Championships was 6 foot 0 inches. I'll use American units just because.
Yeah.
So does a high jumper then take their break after Worlds, go back 3 weeks later, and then immediately set the bar to 11 foot, 8 inches and try to best their PR? No. Did they set it to 5'9" or 5'11" and just try to come barely under their PR and then work up in that single workout in quarter-inch increments till they beat their PR? Do they, every single time they go and do a high jump workout, which might be 2 or 3 times a week, do they try to add a quarter inch to their previous PR? No. You see where I'm going with this? What do we do with power meters? We all glorify our best 5-minute effort ever, our best 20-minute effort ever, just because they conveniently fit in those bins and they've been beaten into us. They're good durations to watch for obvious reasons, but every time we go out, if I went out and did 405 watts for 5 minutes, every single other 5-minute effort I ever do past that point is going to pale in comparison if it wasn't as good. Now, high jumpers understood this innately because they've always had a direct way to measure the actual output of every jump. I mean, yeah, of course, there are tiny fractions of this and that, probably the track surface and probably wind and temperature played into it.
Right.
But those are minor in comparison to how those variables affect performance in cycling up a 5-minute hill or a 20-minute climb, or even more so on a flat road for 20 minutes. So what I think a lot of cyclists and even coaches still haven't really grasped is that you have to look at your power output and your output as a rider seasonally and understand where it is in the big picture. And this is perhaps one of the most important roles as a coach, is for us to constantly get the rider to back out and look at the forest and stop focusing on trees, because they do an interval workout in March and you give them a 4x4 VO2 or 5x5 or whatever hard thing it is, and they go and they immediately look up their old power numbers in whatever software they're using. They go, oh man, I suck right now. Last summer, before, I won that race, I smashed it and I did 375 for all 5x5. And now I can barely do, my best one was 349 and then I fell off a cliff. It's like, well, okay, but that's not the way it works. Humans don't progress infinitely. There's not a linear progression. There's an undulation to training load. And that rule can be synopsized with, there are many times in your season when you have to take a couple steps backwards to take several steps forwards.
Look, I did my last race just over a month ago at the end of, or beginning of October. So we're now middle of November. I took several weeks off. I got finally back on the trainer last night and did intervals. And I was probably 40, 50 watts below what I was doing those intervals at a month and a half ago. And to tell you the truth, I looked at my wattage last night and I'm like, woo, I don't normally do this well in November.
Yeah.
But compared to a month and a half ago, I'd be crying.
Well, and I think that idea that it's not linear, and some of what you have to play into that too is how it feels. You take that 2 steps forward. Maybe you don't even take a step back. Maybe you just stay in the same place. But gosh, it feels awful compared to those 2 steps you took forward. And then the other thing we don't even talk about this, the 5% difference between every head unit on every, and how it's going to measure, right? Like, I have multiple power meters and my carbon one reads slightly different than my aluminum one. Right. And this is real, right? You can get a brand new carbon power meter. You're like, dude, I'm going to be amazing. And you're 20 watts lower. Apples to apples, oranges to oranges, and understand what those things are. And Colby hit the nail on the head. I mean, we shouldn't be expecting athletes to understand that, but that is what you rely on a coach for. And I think sometimes coaches miss that too. It's just, how do we load? How do we load? The load needs to be better. The load needs to be higher.
So 2018, I finally I always experiment on myself. So I kind of succumbed to what everybody had been telling me, because I was down to doing 8-9 races a year. And everybody's, all the athletes I worked with were saying, why is it that you let so they love to talk about CTL. Why do you let your CTL come way down? Why don't you just kind of maintain the level? Why do you let the fitness come down? So I finally went, okay, fine. And I had a really good season in 2017. So I was all excited. And I can show you the graph. It's the 1 year where you just see my CTL never really drop.
Right. It just stays at that level.
And at first I was like, damn, they've got something to this. Because in March, I was flying. I was doing really well in the races. By May, I was done. Yeah.
And you talk about drop off a cliff. And we alluded to this in the cross episode. One of the things we found out about Max Chance was we left him up a couple of years ago. And he was super motivated. He was first year pro on the road. He was really driving. And he was just hanging out up there. And everything I got back from the athlete was, I feel great.
Yep.
Dude, I feel great. And I'm begging him to take that break, but dude, I feel great. Shows up at Colorado Classic and he's off the bat. day one off the back. And then we started scrolling back, and what we were looking at wasn't the number. It was how long we were steady at a load. Mm-hmm. And, 2 years prior, and this is one of the benefits of working with an athlete for a long time, 2 years prior, he was too long at a different load. Mm. And that was 20 CTL lower than the load he was too high at or too long at this time. But for him, it became a duration. You have 6 weeks at load, and then we have to take a break. And that's different for every athlete, and you have to kind of understand that athlete. But I think one of the battles you're going to fight with athletes is how they feel. I feel great. I feel great. How you feel there's relevancy to it. But one of the things you have to remember is you still need a break. You can feel amazing, but if you don't take that break, it doesn't matter. You were living on borrowed time.
Doesn't last forever.
Right. It's even that idea of like, hey, I feel great in the first 5 minutes of this time trial at 110% of LT, but you're living on borrowed time. Yeah. This is how it works.
And the point that I really wanted to make there is it doesn't matter how much you're racing. Like some people look at pros and go, oh, they're doing tons of races. 2018, I did 4 races and I was burnt out.
Mm-hmm. We get into this conversation about swimming. And I hate to bring up swimming again,
it's
but
fine.
There's this conversation.
There's humans too.
There's a conversation that swimming is a burnout sport. Because it's a tough sport. You chase walls and you stare at a black line. Swimming's not a burnout sport. The type of training that is prevalent in swimming is burnout training.
Right.
So I think this is something that everybody has to understand. We've watched a million athletes burn out on the bike. Dude, the bike's rad. You can ride outside a ton. And then I've watched athletes ride inside on the trainer 6:30 in the morning every day because of their jobs, and they never burn out because of how they're training and what they're doing and where their mindset is.
So it's not the stimulus, it's not the race starts, it's how the load is applied.
Yeah.
And the timing.
Yes.
Context is very, very important.
So one thing I wanted to jump in here, we were talking about what we can learn from the pros and how we build a season. One of the things is actually having a focus race, having an A race or having a peak race. We see this in cross a lot. You walk into a season and they're trying to race every single one of these 15 to 20 cross races at the highest level they can get to. And we understand why, especially now that people are chasing USAC points or UCI points amongst the pros. But you still have to have this understanding of what's the A race? What am I really peaking for? Mm-hmm. And obviously nationals goes on that list for a lot of people, but maybe it's your travel race where there's great USAC points. Maybe it's a midseason C1 for a pro rider. But learning where pros are prioritizing what it is that they do. There are training races out there. Mm-hmm. There's the old school. If you're racing in leg warmers, it's a training race.
Yeah.
Right? Take them off. It's no longer a training race. And that maybe falls into some of that Euro nutsy thinking, but there's something that triggers, right? You take those leg warmers off and hey man, I'm in it. This is real.
There's also something worth mentioning. The type of race has a much bigger impact on the rider's physiology in certain cases. So, for example, you do 15 or 20 cross races every weekend in a row. Every one of those races is a maximal effort of a given duration. And for elite riders, that's an hour. But, for a lot of other categories, 45 minutes or 50 minutes, 55 minutes. You can do a 50-minute criterium or an hour and a half long criterium. And you can sit in most of the time. And so you've got some snappy accelerations out of the corners. Depending on how flat it is, you may not even have that many of those. And then you're following wheels. So the point is, the old school race into shape model was based primarily on road racing. And a lot of the old school European road events, riders could go hide in the peloton for a 4-day stage race or 5-day stage race. Yeah, of course, they got to make it up the climbs. But the rest of the day, they're just following wheels. It's like a giant motor pace session. Yeah. That's a far different load than when you're racing cyclocross every weekend. When you cross the line at the end of a cross race, unless you intentionally shut it down, you're smoked. Yeah. And it's the same is true with cross country.
Yes.
And that goes into why my taper model is a little different for those events. You have to be fresher for those types of efforts than you do for a given type of road race. It depends, again, on the road race. A hill climb is different than a 100-mile flat road race in the Southeast.
Yeah.
Which is also different than a 100-mile flat road race in Colorado, where everybody thinks it's going to be easy. And then, of course, people are crossing the line, separated by minutes, with blood coming out of their nose. But, yeah.
All right, so we've talked about some of those things we can take away. Let's flip it around. What can't we take away from pros, looking at pros?
So I think a lot of what we look at with pros is what are their race days like? Colby alluded to this before. Even their flat one-day races are 250K. They're big races, guys. They're not counting a whole lot of criteriums as race days. So, or they're 3-week stage races. So there's something like this that adds some monstrous load to what it is that they're doing. And they can approach those in different ways. There's 8 guys on the team now. They can hide. Maybe they're only getting bottles for the first half of that race, and then they jettison it out and just roll it in. So a lot of their season model, or what a pro is doing and what they're counting as a race day, or how they're peaking for that race day, is very different from a rider who's riding a local schedule. They have maybe a couple long one-day races. You know, we use Colorado as an example. Early season Boulder-Roubaix is a long race. That's a pretty heavy miles for almost every category. Unfortunately, not so much for some of the early women's categories. We'd love to see that extend. But then you're into summer solstice, crit. And that load is very different in a 1 hour crit. You know, even if your job is to go blow that thing up, the intensity is not through the roof. It's solid intensity, but it's only an hour long. And then we talked earlier, volume and intensity are your loads, right? That volume short, maybe you have a mid-load intensity. Talk about a cross race, high intensity, lower volume, and how you judge those things. So it's difficult to use the pro rider model on counting race days or to race yourself into shape, because the races they're doing are so incredibly different than the races we're doing for the most part.
Yeah. When I have worked with several pros where their race calendar is so intense, basically from March on, you barely give them an interval session.
Yeah.
It is really about just, let's get you recovered and ready for the next race and just ride easy or rest, which you just can't model after at all unless you're doing that volume of hard racing.
I know it's hard to find that many races, right? That race recover volume model that they're doing in Europe early season, right? Starting with San Sebastian in February, and it's a month of race recover, race. That's it. Maybe a couple openers and that's it. We're never going to model that here. You know, because even if our biggest load is a race Saturday or race Sunday, usually one of them's crit. And then you have 5 days in between. We're not talking about a 5-day stage race, 3 days, single day race, midweek single day race, end of the week single day race. I think sometimes people don't quite understand the load of a pro rider during those blocks either. You know, we focus on the classics. We see the weekend races. Dude, they're doing Wednesday races like crazy. And we're not in that place. Even if we're going and doing our Tuesday night crit, that load's a very different animal.
Well, the one thing I wanted to bring up, I'm not sure if this fits under what you should take from pros or what you can't take from pros, but most pros will tell you, oh, I need 8-10 races in my legs before I really feel like I'm ready to race. So if you're racing 3 races in a season, you're not even halfway there. And I do believe so. There's something you get from race intensity you cannot simulate with intervals. You can do all the interval work you want. That first race of the season is going to be a shock to the legs. So again, does this fit under take from pros or don't take from pros? But if you're only racing 3 races in a year, you need to find ways to get that race intensity before you go to that first event, or you're going to be pleasantly
unpleasantly surprised. Yeah, and I think you have to get creative on that. And as you noted, you know, you can go to Zwift in the basement. You're never going to push what you push in a race setting. Maybe get out there with some of your buddies and sprint each other and race each other for a 1-minute effort, or give somebody a head start, try to run them down. Something along those lines that inspires you the way a race day is going to inspire you. And so when we get into that place where we're going just 4 or 5 races in a season, that's probably super important to model some training sessions going into that first race to give that. Because that first race is always difficult.
Let's go there.
Okay.
That's the scenario. So person X has 4 or 5 races he wants to do in a season. And we'll talk about 2 scenarios here. The first scenario being person X wants to do all of those races and they're crammed together in an 8-week stretch. And then the second scenario we'll talk about is they're all spread out. But let's dive into the first one.
I'm really going to talk to scenario A because that is Ontario racing. So all the athletes I was coaching up in Toronto, season starts mid-April, it ends at the end of May.
Okay.
And that's because that's the only time we don't have snow on the ground.
Perfect. Snow's come in June and no. So dive into that, Trevor. What's that season typically look like?
Well, so the first thing I'm going to surprise people with is the biggest mistake I see a lot of athletes make up there is they still burn themselves out. So that last race at the end of May, beginning of June, is the provincial championships. The races that everybody really cares about is right at the end of that block. And you wouldn't believe how many guys or racers don't even make it to those last couple of races because they're done. And their philosophy is the season is really short, so I need to come in firing on all cylinders.
Yes.
And not realizing that'll get you through April, might get you through the first week of May, but then you're done.
Mm-hmm.
So I have always struggled with the athletes I coach up there of saying, you're not going to be your best that first race. Really focus on the base work. My belief is if you do a good base season, like really build that aerobic engine and you go into the races, what you're going to find is I can sit in the field. I can stay with the lead group. What I don't have is that 1 minute jump at the end to win the race, but I can finish 7th, 8th. And that's what I want for the first race. And then it really doesn't take long to turn you from that to somebody who's competing for the win.
Mm-hmm.
But you want to be there, in that season. So I'll use that example, that kind of mid-April to first week of June. I don't want them really on top, on really good race form until sometime in May.
Right.
And that's when the big races are.
Assuming that their peak or their target races are at the end versus at the beginning of that block.
Sure, and you can look at it in microcosm as a big season too. I mean, you still can take a little 2-day stand down or a little 3-day stand down in the middle of that race block. Mm-hmm. If there's something really special for you as the first race of that block and you want to do really well at the first and the end, how do you get creative in the middle, right? How do you get that little rest in the middle? Or, as Trevor was noting, maybe the races you're not as aggressive or super focused on are the ones in the middle. Mm-hmm. And so maybe you have to train through them or recover through them or something along those lines.
Yeah.
But the one thing I've never seen is somebody being successful at being at top form, even for that short a period of time.
Right.
That's interesting. It makes me wonder if that's sort of a failing of human nature, which is that I think all athletes have such a vested interest in the outcome of their races. And the easy trap to fall into is, let's say you have an 8-week block of racing. What you want to do is go into that first race weekend, assuming that it's one of your races you really want to do well at, and your idea is to run hot through all 8 weeks. Well, like Grant, like you were saying, some athletes may not have 8 weeks in their system. They might be like Max, and they've got 6 weeks tops. But even if you are an athlete who's got 8 weeks tops, what we all want to do as humans is we want to have 2 or 3 or 4 weeks before where we're just smashing it in training, where we're setting all our PRs and everything's going perfectly.
Build that confidence.
And that's great. You've got confidence. And then you can go to the line and just be ready to annihilate people, which, for the record, causes its own set of problems.
Oh my God, yes.
Right? I've gone to the line under that false veil at times, and it's just usually those are races that I have to go very poorly. But that said, and I've watched a lot of athletes go through that too. So different lesson in and of itself. But the point being is, if you think you've only got 6 weeks or 8 weeks or however many weeks, maybe you don't know how many weeks you've got at Top Fitness or a certain CTL, that's okay. But think about it logically. The smarter way to play it is to time the peak so that you are on form with your first weekend of racing, go out and perform, step to the line with sensible confidence in yourself, confidence in your training, in the process, and then let the results be what they are. Do the best to execute on the day. You've done all the work. And that takes a mature athlete to get to that point. The athletes who are younger in their careers or perhaps don't have as much unshakable self-belief will want to go to the line, having proven to themselves several times that they can go rip up their local climb super fast or win the group ride. And what they're not putting together necessarily is they're basically spending their race days in training.
Yeah.
Yep.
They're effectively extending that.
They're trying to.
Yeah. It's now 12 weeks if you're talking about an 8-week where they're trying to be on top form, but for the 4 weeks preceding that, they're actually on top form. They're smashing it. That's 12-week block.
Right.
Right. And I think I have a great story from my past on this. When I first started racing cyclocross and around here, I mean, the guys my age are really special riders and special racers. And we'd go out on those Wednesday Worlds days, which used to be everybody.
They were true Wednesday Worlds here.
Yeah, they were epic. Yeah. And you'd go out and I'd go out and I'd be measuring my training based on Wednesday Worlds. I'm like, dude, I'm with the front group.
Yep.
I'm with the front group. And then I rolled into Saturday.
I'm going to win this weekend.
And I'm like, I'm way off the back. What the hell happened? And what I started to come across to is what people were using Wednesday Worlds for. And the top riders were using them for a high level pace skill day. Mm-hmm. We're rolling at high levels of pace and I'm working my skills, or I'm going to work my start and then I'm going to float to the back and then I'm going to work my way through the field. So what are we using our Wednesday group rides for, right? What are we using our Saturday group rides for? And if we're using them for race days, if we're using them for confidence, and we're using them to keep our buddies in their place, then that season extends a lot. And things get real dangerous real quick.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, which plays to a bigger point, which is expand over a long timeline, look at the athlete and think about whatever analogy you want to use, how many bullets they have, how many really deep days do you have in the tank? And a lot of athletes don't they don't understand that concept, so they use them without really thinking about where they're placing them. A professional rider, this is a takeaway that we can get from pros. A real pro knows when to save that super deep effort. They know, and they
probably have a larger cache of them to begin with, but they also use them strategically.
But the concept is still the same.
Sure,
I mean, just because those people are the 0.1 of 1% doesn't really matter. The concept still applies, which is they have a limited number of efforts they can do that are super deep. And that applies both to volume and intensity. So they know they're not going to do a 7-hour training ride, walk through the door absolutely shattered. No smart pro really does that. Or if they do, it's very calculated, and it's a very calculated build with a specific rest before a race. But very rarely do they do that. Most training days are about stopping just short of that line and then saving that day for when they need it on race day. When they're racing for the win, or they're racing for the best result they've ever had, or they have to throw down in the high mountains to be a domestique for the guy who's winning the 3-week Grand Tour or whatever it is.
Well, and I think there's a great point to be made for that, is that just because you could do another one doesn't mean you should do another one. Just because you can roll another hour doesn't mean you should roll another hour. So that there's that real fine line between what I am capable of and what is appropriate for today. And then one last thought on this stuff too is it's something really important to keep in mind is if we're training for confidence or racing for confidence. Hey, Mark Cavendish was the greatest sprinter in the world, 8 years ago? He was untouchable. He didn't win every race. Right? Cipollini did not win every race. Stuff happens. And you got to have that understanding. And that ability to look at a process-oriented goal and not a result-oriented goal. Dude, I had a great sprint for third because I got boxed in back there. My output was fantastic. I timed it great. I did everything right. Had some bad luck. And there's a lot to be taken from that. It's not, as we talked about with high jumping, it's not a set result, right? And you got to be really careful of that.
Well, you think about it, the winningest racer in the world will win like 15 to 20% of their races. And that's the winningest. Most people, it's maybe 5%. So if you're doing 3 to 5 races in a season, you can do the math.
Yeah.
And I going to every race to win.
And I think there's a great idea to go to some races to do totally different things. If you're fortunate enough to have a team, go to some races and work for somebody else. Yeah. And then go to some races where you're going to try to win, and that may mean you're getting in the breakaway. And that might not work. But you have to take those risks, and you have to figure out what it is that you're trying to do.
There is nothing more fun than to go to a race and say, I'm racing for my teammate. So I'm going to get on the front and smash myself, and I don't even need to finish.
That's great.
I just get to hurt everybody.
It's a blast. And I think riders miss that, right? Some of this is dog hanging their head out the window with the tongue flapping in the breeze, just going, yeah. And I love that. And I think that's one of the reasons most of us got into athletics, right? And then it morphs very, very quickly into, how did I finish? What place did I get? What's going on, right? You know when you ripped it.
We need a photo of that face so we can put in the show notes.
I could probably find it. I got some good pain faces through the years.
I don't want to get us too off track, but I wonder if we could use a case study here and use a particular pro to say what he's doing right and what he's doing wrong. Because, first of all, he's the most talked about rider in the world right now. He races across disciplines, but he also seems to get the fact that he can't win everything, so he has to dip in and dip out. I'm talking about Matthew Van Der Poel, of course. So he's racing cross, he's racing on the road, he's racing mountain bikes. Next year, he'll probably be winning Dirty Kanza. What's he doing right and what's he doing wrong? I know it's hard. You're from the outside to judge, but it seems like he's picking those battles.
Let's pick one really simple one. The biggest thing he did right was pick his parents.
Sure.
Well, I think, okay, there's a great note. It's a really, really great note here is after Worlds, who heard from him?
He disappeared.
And how long did he disappear for? He disappeared for a month plus.
Mm-hmm.
And then he pushed back the start of his cross season twice.
Yep.
Because it was, I need to recover and I'm not ready. Now I'm ready. I'll step in. And he stepped in and he did really, really well. And it was really fun as a cross specialist watching that first race. His first 4 laps, he was a disaster.
Yeah.
His little mistakes he was making, he was all over the map. But What is different about Van der Poel is it took him 4 laps and then he had it again. And he just looked like amazing again. It might take us 4 races. But all right, that's a genetic special piece there, right? So what does he do? Why aren't we doing that? Where's that big break that we're not doing, right? Where's that, oh God, I'm making mistakes like crazy, but it's the first 4 laps of my season. Yeah, he maybe figure out in a race, but why aren't we giving ourselves that break the first race we're back in cross, where we're trying to figure out how to do that off camber? So that was the biggest thing I saw out of him, is this very focused of when he stepped into road after Cross Worlds, disappeared in the middle of road season. When he stepped over to the mountain bike, then it was very, very rarely cross, road, mountain bike all in the same month, so to speak, right? They're very split off. And then you see him with realistic expectations. I really think that's another thing. The first mountain bike race he stepped into, he wasn't, and listen, this is a guy that we've watched get really frustrated with himself. And when he gets frustrated with himself, he checks out. You see that in the cross setting. You see that even when he bonked at Worlds. That wasn't him mentally, but when he was done, he's done. Right? And so he got his butt kicked in a couple mountain bike races early season for him, but you didn't see that dejection. He understood where he was stepping into, and he stepped into it appropriately.
And this goes back to right where we started this whole podcast, which is sometimes us regular Joes will look at the pro season and go, my God, it goes from February until October. If they can last that long, I can last that long. And you have to remember, the season lasts that long. None of the pros
they don't last that long.
They don't do that.
Right.
They take breaks. They have points in the season when they're strong, and they have points in the season when they disappear. And you talk to any pro, when they get that week where they don't have to do anything, they go and sit on a beach.
Yeah, they're on a beach, and Instagram kind of shows that now, right?
Hopefully they are.
Yeah.
The only well, there's one exception to that rule, and it's the Yates brothers, because they are in every race, but there's actually 2 of them.
Doppelganger.
Yeah. And they're and in a lot of those races, they're the first rider and the last rider.
Exactly. Yes.
So bookending the peloton.
All right, sorry for the tangent, but yeah, let's jump into scenario B now. Typical rider, regional rider, wants to do his 5 races throughout the season, and they're really spread out. He's going to do Land Run 100 in March. He's going to do a road race in June. He's going to do, Steamboat in September. Something like that, where there's months.
Quarterly.
A quarterly race schedule. Yeah, something like that. How does that person set up their season?
So I'll start it out with going back to something we said earlier, is this issue of you can't have race legs until you've got some racing in your legs. And so when it's this spread out, you can run that risk of every race is your first race. So whenever I work with an athlete who's in this scenario, sometimes you got to go with the poor man's approach to it, but leading up to each of those events, we need to find ways of getting race intensity. Even if it's just, hey, there's a Tuesday night throwdown going on, I want you to go to that. I don't care if you win, but I want you to destroy yourself.
Yeah, you said it. You'd come into each of those 4 races kind of stale. And then that's your one shot, and then, oops, I screwed it up. Yeah. I didn't have the legs, or I didn't have the race confidence or something, and then, I got to wait another month. So that's the danger there. Yeah. What else would you add to that, Colby?
I would add that, so this comes back to our logic about how riders tend to think that they're different from pros. Let's be clear. There are differences between amateur riders and pro riders, or aspiring riders and those who get paid. The World Tour pros are riders, men and women, are riders who have already self-selected to be in the top 10th of 1%, or maybe even a slimmer percentage than that. But that doesn't mean that basic training concepts and basic concepts of load do not apply to you as they do to them. So I think the error in logic that I see happening repeatedly is riders assume, well, okay, I've got my 4 races laid out for this season, and yeah, those are going to be pretty hard. But if a pro goes the entire year and trains all year, which we've talked about that, in most cases they don't, I'm just going to train all year and get fitter and fitter through my 4 races. So I'm going to try to go really good for my first one, and then I'm just going to lift from there.
I'm just going to get better, right?
Just going to get better.
Better, yeah.
And that's not the way to look at it. If you're truly going to break the season into thirds or quarters, treat each one like your world championship. Treat each one like Van der Poel does. Now, obviously, you can't take a month off, but what I run into with my athletes a lot is they'll do a national championship, and then it ends Sunday, and Tuesday morning they're emailing me going, "Where's my training?"
Right.
Like, your training's in Training Peaks right now.
Right.
See how it says nothing?
Yeah.
That's what you're doing.
Yeah.
Nothing.
Right.
And then I get the discussion of, I'm worried about losing fitness. My next race is 8 weeks away or 6 weeks away in this model, right? In our scenario bay. So to that end, I think you need to treat each one like a little peak and then have a small valley afterwards. And then that's the perfect week to look back and reflect on your preparation.
Yeah, maybe your peak
go
needs
right?
to be higher. Maybe your peak needs to be lower.
Right. Maybe you needed two more of those race intensity throwdown days, or you hire a motor pacer safely, or you...
So 4 individual builds to 4 different races with 4 peaks.
More or less.
Sort of.
Yeah. That's how I would tackle it. If the time, depending on the type of race and the terrain and where you live and all those other variables, of course, but fundamentally, that's how I would look at that model. For sure.
Your CTL's graph ought to look like the Front Range.
Yeah.
Right. Peak valley, peak valley, peak valley.
Right.
Yep.
And
one
it's
nice thing you get out of this is so when you talk about one way in which you can progress through the season is each race is an experiment for the next. So maybe you try peaking strategy for the first one and go, yeah, that wasn't right at all. You have the time now before the next race to adjust that, try a different approach. And keep adjusting until you find what really
Manipulate
works for you.
variables, pull levers.
But, and now as we roll this into the Fondo.
Yes, one big race. You've got the scenario C, if you will, is you've got one shot to get it right. Let's add some pressure. Like, this is a very meaningful event. For
that
this
was
person.
one of the first things I was going to say is try to find a way to unload the pressure on that. It's really, really hard to have that one race be the only race, the only performance measurement, all of those things. Even if you're not going to add little races, I would add little tests, little opportunities to see what you can do that's special. And if you only have one thing in the season, well, let's look at it from a couple different angles. If you only have time for one thing in the season, you've got a really busy life. Let's have those goals be appropriate for you.
And have fun, yeah.
Yeah, and have fun.
Right.
And if you're looking at it and going, you know what, I just don't want to get too serious. I just want to have one race. I want to keep it fun. Then keep it fun, And so I don't think you build your whole season around that one single Grand Fondo race. It's way too easy to miss it, or it's way too easy to obsess and get in that last bit and refuse to rest or refuse to lay off the build. So if you're looking at that one thing where, I want to be successful, I want to be to completion, then communicate that with your coach. Let's make sure we're working toward completion and fun and all of those things.
And that's an important thing. We've had a lot of listeners who have contacted us about how do I build towards a Grand Fondo. And usually what they say is, I'm not there to win it. I'm there to have the experience.
Right.
And so they wonder what's different. I will say some of these build and peaking strategies we're talking about are still important because you don't want to go to the Grand Fondo burnt out because you're on your best form a month ago. So you still want the base, and you still want to limit the time that you're doing some hard work. So you can go there and feel like you whether you're racing or just there for yourself, you still feel like you had a great experience. And I agree with you completely. If you have one event and you're really focused on it, you're either going to have an amazing season or a horrible season. So I think it's always good, even if it's just, okay, I'm doing this Grand Fondo in June. Be aware of an event in September, just in case everything falls apart in June. You got something else to look to. Colby?
Yeah, I agree with those comments. I mean, I've had seasons where I've had almost one event per season, but I've also been racing for 3.5 decades.
Yeah,
so
yeah.
I know that comment doesn't apply to most of our audience, probably, hopefully. But yeah, I would agree with that. I think some run-ins, this is where, what do you have that's a local tool? Okay, sometimes that can be limited. If you're in a place where there aren't any good group rides, or maybe the group rides aren't safe, which is unfortunately becoming more and more common these days, right?
Yeah.
Arguably, some of the group rides in Boulder aren't that safe anymore.
Cracked ribs to back that one up.
Yeah, absolutely.
Maybe the group rides just don't work for your schedule, or etc. And you're not the type of rider who's going to go out and hire a motor pacer, which would be another option to stimulate race intensity. Well, there are a lot of things I don't like about Strava, and there are a lot of things I love about Strava. Strava segments they're basically your do-it-yourself race.
Yeah.
And those can be really useful. So you lay out a calendar and you say 2 weeks before, I'm going to go smash this Strava segment that is applicable to my race load. So if you're doing a Fondo with a lot of half-an-hour climbs, maybe you pick a 20-minute climb and a 30-minute climb locally, and you go warm up for an hour or two, and then you smash those and you see what you can do. And then you're building up to that. And it's like your trial race run. And yes, go so as far as to rehearse the food you're going to eat during your Fondo, the hydration strategies, the breakfast, break out your race wheels, use the same kit, do as many things as you can on that day. The more rehearsals you have prior to your one event of the year to make sure everything's dialed, the better. I mean, I did Masters National Time Trial Championships this year just because they were in the backyard in Colorado Springs, and I made a crucial error. I actually changed the padding material on my aero bars the day before.
Nice. You dumb.
No,
Nice.
sorry, I did it about 5 days before, thinking I was dialed, but what I forgot was I wore a long sleeve skin suit on race day, and they were on bare skin. The new pad was perfect, but on the long sleeve skin suit, I was constantly sliding off the back of the bars.
Mm-hmm.
So I started the time trial within the first 800 meters, had to call myself a dumbass because...
Well, we're not
Not
going
the first time, not the last
We're not going to
time.
judge Colby too much because I am racing that cross race tomorrow on a bike that I built today. So
That happens.
Well
yeah,
done.
That happens.
that's going to be
Wait,
fantastic.
you built it or you had?
No, I didn't build it.
Good. You won't.
Oh, jeez. If I built it, it would be one of those cartoons
Wait.
where you take 2 pedal strokes and everything falls
Max
off.
didn't build it. did
No,
he?
Eric.
good.
Eric,
Even
Eric,
better.
Eric. Eric's looking over everything right now.
So something I'm going to add to that. If you're just targeting one Grand Fondo in the season and you're just there to ride, something that's very, very important is find ways to get experience riding in a peloton
Yes.
beforehand. I had that horrible experience of being in a Grand Fondo where just because of horrible coincidental timing, the A group and the C group merged. And there were a couple riders in the C group who suddenly found themselves in a very fast, very experienced group.
You've
There
told
was
this
a
story
crosswind,
before.
Did I tell this to you?
Yes, and it's not a pleasant ending for the woman.
They got guttered and they flipped out. And yeah, she crashed hard, lost some teeth.
yeah,
Really, I mean,
yeah.
it was a horrible, horrible experience. And if you're going to go to a Grand Fondo, you need some comfort. So just go to a Saturday morning group ride. You don't have to go to the race one. Find one that's just everybody riding together, but get that comfort in a group.
Yep. Final scenario we've got for you. I don't race at all. I just want to kick ass at the weekly race or weekly group training ride or whatever you want to call it. The throwdown, Wednesday Worlds, whatever it is.
Right. So step 1, make sure you're not being that guy. And what I mean by that is we're watching it a lot in the group rides around Boulder is that people are using them for their races. And they just haven't really
free.
told
Don't have to
anybody
pay.
else. So, that guy's guttering it, or they're doing this, or they're doing that. So understand your group ride, right? Understand the group ride you're getting into. If this is a no-drop ride, then don't be the guy that tries to drop everybody. If this is a really focused training ride, don't gutter it. Do those things. But understand what it is that you're trying to be, and don't be that guy. But, if you're in that place, this comes down to, again, what we spoke about a little bit with the one race a season idea. Why is this the scenario you're in? If it is busy schedule, as it is those things, then really let's customize a plan and a program and a training schedule that builds around what it is that your life is. So maybe if it's about the weekly training rides, let's look at the season or the load, recover in a microcosm. Maybe it's a Tuesday, Wednesday, 2-day load with a Thursday drop and maybe some openers on Friday. Then we hit the group ride on Saturday. And then we tootle around a little bit on Sunday. We do our day off on Monday. But how do we load in a smaller plan so that, we have load, but we have recovery built in there too? Then look at your vacations or your work schedule or your family schedule and have that be the punctuation on your season, right? So, hey, I got a 4-week block of I really want to smash 4 Saturday rides. Great. Now take a break. Mm-hmm. This is almost an easier way to overload yourself, not racing and just every week I want to go be on it. I want to be on it. I want to be on it. Understand there's weeks you're not going to be on it. And a lot of times while you're not on it, this is the coach in all of us about to say this. It's probably not that you're not on it because you're out of shape. It's probably that you're not on it because you're tired.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
And that leads into that negative feedback loop. I'm not on it. I must be out of shape.
I better train more.
Got to train harder. Still not on it. Got to train more.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's this downward spiral.
All right, Colby, what do you think in that scenario?
So, I think this is I've had several clients who've been in this scenario or in this situation where they're having trouble making it perhaps out of their local town or local area, but they do have either a weekly criterium series or a weekly group ride. And that seems to be kind of the method or the repetitious circuit that they're sort of stuck in, right? And maybe that's by design, maybe it's by circumstance. But the problem comes when you've got weeks and weeks of this same load. And what is the enemy of progress? It is static load. And this is a basic concept I think a lot of athletes miss, and maybe even some coaches. simply that it doesn't matter if the load is high or the load is medium or the load is low. Static load is the enemy of progress. It's the enemy of change. And we want change in coaching. That's the objective. We want to make an athlete better than they are. So when we have the same load for 40 weeks a year, when there are places in the country who have these types of events, right? I mean, Boulder's got a local group ride that goes off at least 40 weeks a year. And I've got a couple clients in Austin who do the Driveway Criterium Series. That thing runs, it's probably over 40 weeks a year. It's crazy how many times you can race that. PIR in Portland. You name almost any city in the West, you've got a similar situation. And the problem is whenever that load is the same, then you run the risk of just sort of getting it. At first, if that load is challenging to your system, you'll respond to it and you'll get stronger and stronger, and then you'll adapt to it, and then you'll get to the point where you can start to successfully apply your best ability, whatever that is, to that load. And then you keep loading with the same load, and the response changes. It has to. So either you get injured or you get sick or you get burned out or you get bored or you just start to suck. Mm-hmm. And so how do you avoid that situation? Well, basically I'm agreeing with what Grant said, which is be smart about it. A very pragmatic way to look at it is integrate some lifestyle factors into this 40 weeks of group rides and say, oh, I've got a wedding to go to, so that takes care of that weekend. And then it's my anniversary, so we're going to go on that weekend, or my daughter's ballet show, or whatever you have, and build it around that. And don't feel bad about it. Take the ones you've got and use them. And maybe then you can start to add load and crescendo and say, the last couple of weeks of this 4-week block, I feel like I'm probably going to go pretty good. We'll build a program around that. I will enjoy myself. I won't take it too seriously because it's a group ride. I'll be safe and enjoy it and get what I'm going to get out of it. And I'll mention that if you're doing this, if this is your cycle, I would encourage you to consider looking at something bigger. I think there's a certain type of athlete who gets stuck in that little microcycle. And really, when you look at yourself honestly, there's a good probability that you have the ability to ride at a higher level, but you're finding reasons not to. Now, I'm not saying everyone's in that camp. There are people who just can never leave their city, and this is what they've got. But most riders in that situation aren't in that situation, aren't boundaried by those circumstances. They want to go do an oat route or a road race or, some fondo or a stage race that's in 2 states over and they can drive there, but they're finding reasons not to do it. And probably most of the time those are fear of failure based. But
I was going to say, creating those natural undulations in the training load through vacations or whatever, busy weeks is good. And you can do it on a season-long basis. You can do it on a monthly-long basis. You can do it on a weekly basis. So you can set up your training and look at your schedule for that week and say, you know what, I got a lot of meetings that one day. Well, that's okay.
That's a good day to not.
This week that's going to be my rest day or my recovery day or whatever. So let's plan backwards from there a little bit and use those other things in life strategically.
Yes.
To map things out.
On that busy day where you've got a ton of meetings, you're going to be smoked, you could still start to choose to start the training crit. But maybe your objective then is you're going to literally be last wheel and just float and enjoy it and use it as an opener and not contest the finish. And it's going to be considered your rest day. I'll also point out that maybe you have an 8-week or 9-week or 12-week stretch where you don't really have anything happening. There's no 4th of July vacation. There's no whatever. Be smart. Don't think I'm Superman. I can make it through all 12 weeks and smash everybody and win every preem in this training crit. You probably can't. Be smart. Right. Take a break halfway through. Just don't do it. Do something else. Go for a long ride. Don't ride your bike. Figure it out. Yeah. Go for a hike.
So I have an athlete that I coach up in Toronto who he's never done a race in his life, but he goes religiously to what's called the donut ride, which is the big Saturday morning ride. Yeah. And when I started coaching him, I basically said, look, you got a choice here. I can keep you mediocre to decent all year round, or we can pick a couple points in the year where you're going to be really strong. So it's kind of, we're going to do a build without a target event at the end of it. It's just kind of a target period. And we chose the latter. And what I love is a lot of the guys on the donut ride just don't understand him, and they ask him about it. So like, some points in the year you show up and you're just hanging on. Other times you're absolutely ripping us apart. But I've talked with him about it. He's like, I really like this. I prefer to have that. I have a 6-week period where I can just crush everybody and I am on form. And he enjoys that a lot more than just being kind of decent all year round.
Yeah. He's not pinning on a number, but for him, that's his outlet. That's his racing outlet in a sense. All right. It's time for take homes. We got 60 seconds on the clock for you, Mr. Grant Holicky from forever endurance.
Wait, I'm flipping the 5-minute timer.
5 minutes. It's going to quickly turn into 1 minute and go.
Well, without Max here to screw me up in the first 10 seconds, this ought to be seamless, right? I think the big takeaways here are maybe step one, find a coach. Find somebody that can help you map out this season. And that may not mean you have to hire somebody full time, but maybe you have somebody that can just give you some consultant, some thoughts of what this season ought to look like. We can be our own worst enemy. We can be the people that want to do a little more. Be smart about your rest. Be smart about your loads, and make those two things very distinct and clear. We talk about it in training. When it's time to go hard, you go really hard. And if it's a base day, ride a base. But when we look at this big season, let's look at it the same way. You want to have a really big load, be focused on that load. You want to recover, put your legs up, don't do anything.
Sweet.
Perfect.
All right, Colby Pearce, you've done this several times before. Take it away. 60-second take-homes on season planning for limited racing.
Yeah, I'll agree with Grant. I think a starting point for a lot of people tackling this kind of equation could be to hire a coach. I mean, I'll say hire a good coach in any case. But we want to respect...
Are you taking new clients, by the way?
Depends on the client.
Just kidding.
The answer is depends. So I think the key is to look at the fluctuations or natural wave-like function to any season like this and consider where the events fall and then how you're going to apply load and recovery within that. And that can be a confounding equation to look at for a rider. That's where a coach's objective eye can really help, and experience and discernment. So this is key to the equation, but some athletes may be able to figure this out on their own. But really what I'm trying to say is respect the wave of load relative to your competition dates, whether your competitions are clustered closely together or whether they're spread out. We still have the same basic principles, which is you have to train hard enough to get yourself better. And then you need to taper off and rest so that you don't go to the event carrying too much fatigue. When your events are spread out over a longer timeline, then, as we discussed, it becomes a question of are you trying to maintain peak fitness for all of them, or are you taking a couple of those events as part of your progression and part of your build towards the peak events? And there's a lot of minutia and subtleties in that. But really, I think looking at the big picture and considering the application of load relative to the competition dates is the big takeaway. That's a really critical process. And even if you figure it out yourself or you think you have it figured out, it's not a bad idea to have someone look it over and give you their opinion, because in coaching, coaching is 80% art, 80% science, right? See what I did there? So there are a lot of ways to skin a cat, and an experienced coach could look at what you have written down or your ideas on how to apply load, and they probably will have some good input one way or another. And that's food for thought. You run it past a few people and now you've got a good recipe.
Any salt in that recipe? Pinch salt?
Just enough. Just like enough. Threshold.
Green salt?
Green
salt.
Or 5-minute timer's green. Sorry.
Green eggs and ham.
Trevor, Coach Connor, 60 seconds. You know how to do this. Go for it.
So whether you are just doing a Grand Fondo, you hit the Saturday morning race, or training rides every once in a while, or you're racing just a couple races a year, or you're a pro doing 60 races, there are a few things that apply to everybody. One of them is we all like to perform. We all like to PR. We all like to have points where we go, wow, I am just doing better than I've ever done. If you want to get to that point versus just always kind of be the same level all the time, there are certain principles that apply. One of them is overload and recovery. You have to do that. You have to have points of really stressing yourself in times where you let your body adapt and recover. The other thing that applies no matter what is you need that period of time where you're doing more of that base work to improve that aerobic engine. And then you need that period where you're hitting yourself really hard with the high intensity work to build that top end fitness so you can hit your PRs. And just be aware of the fact that when you hit that point, you're on a time limit before you have to take a break again. And timing that, being aware of that, knowing when you want to hit those points is really key, no matter what you're doing. Chris?
Well, mine's kind of on the practical side of things. I love mapping and maps and planning, and I feel like I'm a pretty organized guy. So I like to think of these, as I alluded to earlier, with thinking of these undulations throughout the season, throughout the month, and throughout the week, And, you know, you can do that by, if you're a user of Training Peaks, you can do it there by like dragging and dropping and matching it up with how busy you are in life and the vacations you might take and the business trips you might take. If you're not on Training Peaks, you know, like do it in Google Calendar, color code everything, see how many meetings you have one day and map your weeks around that, maps your months around that. I think sitting down before the season begins and having a plan is great. And looking at it from that broad point of view is great. And then getting into the season itself, know that you're going to change things, know that you're going to need to change things. You're going to want to adapt the schedule as life comes at you in different ways, and being able to sort of drag and drop your life around and your training life around in different ways to make a better blend of load and rest is really helpful if you can see it and visualize it in front of you. That was another episode of Fast Talk. As always, we love your feedback. Email us at fasttalk@fastlabs.com. Subscribe to Fast Talk on iTunes, Stitcher, Spotify, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Be sure to leave us a rating and a comment. The thoughts and opinions expressed on Fast Talk are those of the individual. For Colby Pearce, the infamous Grant Holicky, the very organized Trevor Connor, I'm that guy, Chris Case. Thanks for listening.